Hello, welcome to Backyard Pet Talk with me, Shannon Riley. And today's guest is Kristina Spaulding. I'm going to let her tell you more about herself, but first, I just want to say she has this great book called The Stress Factor in Dogs. It looks like this. So we'll be talking a little bit about that and probably other things too. But I have been really excited to have Kristina as a guest. And so hopefully our talk will help you and help your dogs. And so welcome, Kristina. Thank you for
Thank
being here.
you.
So let's just jump in because people want to know more about you, I'm sure. How did you get into animal behavior and into this research? And where did it kind of start for you?
When I was very young, I mean, not the research part of it, obviously, but I have been interested in animal behavior for a very long time. I went back many years ago. I was like looking through this stack of like assignments, from like grade school or whatever it was. I guess it was middle school. And I found something I'd written in eighth grade and said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to rehabilitate aggressive dogs." I
Oh,
was like, wow,
wow.
I guess I'd locked on to that
And
really early.
approximately what year was that?
Oh boy.
Doesn't have to be
That
exact.
probably would have been like uh, like the late 80s, like
Right.
89
And no
something.
one was talking about that then. So I just wanted to highlight that as like
Yeah.
you're kind of like what do they call them now? Influencers? Like you were an early influencer.
I mean, honestly, I think for the first, I started training dogs. I started working in a shelter and I was an assistant trainer at Patricia McConnell's school in Madison, Wisconsin.
Mm,
And so I would say, really, until I was pretty much, I think, until I finished my PhD, I was just learning from other
mm,
people. So it wasn't until maybe not quite finishing it, but it wasn't until I was towards the end of my PhD program that I started like speaking at conferences and things like
mm-hmm,
that. But yeah, I've been interested in animal behavior for a really long time. My undergraduate degree was in wildlife ecology, and that was about as close as I could get to studying animal behavior. It's really hard.
mm,
There are very few animal behavior departments. You really have to go into biology or psychology or maybe wildlife ecology. I mean, honestly, I don't regret my wildlife ecology degree at all because it was really cool. But if I did it over again, I may have gone into psychology instead.
I can totally agree. I have my degree in biology, zoology, and I always loved behavior and I loved psychology. And I probably would have done like my double major or major minor or
That's
something.
Yeah, I
That's what I
would have
should have
loved.
done.
Right, right. Instead, I just majored in wildlife ecology, and then my graduate degree is in psychology. So I guess it.
All worked out. So that is amazing. And then you became a cab, and I haven't had a
Yes.
cab actually on my podcast. I just realized. Can you kind of tell people what being a cab is? Because some
Yeah.
people who are listening may have go, "What the heck are they talking about?" Mm-hmm.
So a CAB is a certified applied animal behaviorist, and there's two levels. There's associate cabs and full cabs. So associate cabs have a master's degree, and full cabs have a PhD. It has to be a PhD in an animal behavior related field. Again, it's very, very hard to find actual PhDs in actual animal behavior. So most of us have PhDs in something like zoology, psychology, biology. And then in addition to that, you have to have a certain amount of coursework, credit loads in animal behavior. And in this case, it's actually animal behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have a certain number of years of experience. And then you also have to go through an application process and a board certification process where your application is reviewed by other cabs and
Mm-hmm.
ACABs. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's quite extensive.
Extensive. Yeah.
So we're growing fairly rapidly now. So I'm not sure what the count is now, but probably somewhere between like 60 and 100 in the world. There's not a
Right.
whole
Kind
lot
of
of
like
us.
behaviorists, kind of like veterinary behaviorists, it's
Right,
growing
exactly.
quickly, but
Yes.
it's not it. I mean, I remember it wasn't that long ago that I was like, there are 50 in the world of veterinary behaviorists.
Right.
And, so it's growing. If somebody's listening who's like, gosh, this sounds like a career path I'd want. And you and I kind of have gone through the whole, it's not been linear at all because
Right.
our field is developing kind of before our eyes. Like you said,
Yes.
it's snowballing. Where would one person get, whether a master's or a PhD that's more animal related? Are there any schools that have that specific? So it's an easier transfer to become a CAB.
So I'll try and give you a short answer.
Exactly.
So again, so anywhere with biology or psychology, maybe zoology, but really what you have to do is you have to go to the school's website, you have to go to the department, and you have to look at the faculty.
Mhm.
And this is something you should do anyway. If you're applying to graduate school, you want to make sure there's a faculty member in the department that has interests that are somewhat in line with yours, because you're going to have to be doing research under someone in the department, and you want to make sure you're doing research that you're interested in, because otherwise it's pretty much torture because
Right.
research is a lot of work. So that's one thing to do. And I mean, I just recommend to people, like, just start with your local, like, closest, universities basically, and see if you get lucky. Otherwise, you can certainly look at other universities further away from you. Virginia Tech does have a master's program in applied animal behavior, or welfare and applied animal behavior. That's a master's program, and they are really very supportive of people getting their cabs. It's headed by a cab. Most, if not all, of the instructors are cabs. And then, like, UPenn now has an online program that's a little bit more, I think it's less focused on, like, working professionals. The Virginia Tech program is very much focused on working professionals.
Mhm.
And then also the Animal Behavior Society itself, which is abs.org, has a page for certified applied animal behaviorists that has a lot more information.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So
So,
if somebody
yes.
really wanted to find it, and the only reason, this is a total caveat from what Christina and I plan to talk about, except the only reason I say that is, as people are giving us feedback from different podcasts, I'm getting people of all different trainers, but then people who are up and coming. And I work with, students sometimes at local high schools, and they're like, I want to do what
Oh,
you
yeah.
do. And it's like, okay, let me give you a little guidance so you're not doing the total zigzag,
Right.
of getting there. Mm-hmm.
And I was just incredibly lucky because I went to school at UW, University of Wisconsin-Madison. I graduated high school in Minnesota, and we had reciprocity there. And I didn't know it at the time, but one of my zoology TAs told me that we had a cab on campus who was a professor there, and that was Patricia McConnell. And so I was able to connect with her and get a lot of guidance from her. And so she really ended up being a mentor to me. And if it wasn't for that,
Know how you would
and
have
I don't
done
know
it.
how long it would have taken me to figure out that there was this, career
Exactly.
path. So,
Exactly. Yeah, Patricia McConnell is just a doll. I have,
yeah.
I have my animal career and behavior career has been raised by her, since the 90s of, watching her when
Yes.
she used to do conferences a lot and tour a lot,
Right.
that's
Right.
limited now, but her and
Yeah.
Karen Pryor, like just really have guided a lot of things I've done. So, well, let's get to your book. So,
Yes.
you have the stress factors in dogs. Now people know a little bit about your background too, so it might, they might understand why you might have written this. But what inspired you to write this book?
So it actually brings us back to graduate school again, because when so my PhD was, it's in psychology, but then in graduate school you have sort of subdivisions within that. So my PhD was in behavioral neuroscience. So we got a lot of training in the, neurobiology of behavior. And so I had an entire class on hormones and behavior, and that talks a lot about stress and the impacts of stress. And what I realized is I took this class and it had so much valuable information, and nobody was talking about it in the
Mhm.
dog world. And I'm thinking about what I'm learning, or what I did learn, and I'm thinking about how that applies to the dogs that I'm working with every day. I mean, I always sort of half jokingly, although it becomes less and less of a joke as I learn more and more, I always say stress impacts everything. I mean, it's so critical to
Hmm.
everything that we do in our lives and everything that we do with animals, that I really felt like this information has to get out there,
Hmm.
because it's such a huge missing piece that if we don't have that information, it really does handicap how much we can do to help animals.
I 100% agree. I've been doing my deep dives into trauma, like some of the things I've been learning in my own personal life. And then you start to see it in animals, and,
Mm.
you go, we need to understand this, whether you're a trainer, whether you're a veterinarian, whether you're a tech or a groom, or if you work at rescues, understanding how that stress is impacting those animals every single day that you're working with, and really understand the stress at a deeper level than, oh yeah, he's stressed, whatever, let's just throw a
Right.
Kong, or like, oh, he's stressed, whatever, like just give some Prozac and that'll be the day, or just give a Kong, or let's give some pheromones. Those are all good things. I'm not saying those are
Right,
bad
right,
things,
right.
but understanding like how deep stress
Yes.
can go, especially when it's like severe stress or chronic stress that's every single day, and how it debilitates, you know.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly, and I think everyone knows that too much stress is bad, right? Like, I don't think, like, I'm not saying people are going around thinking that, everything about stress is wonderful. Certainly, people recognize that there's a problem there, but like you said, I think there's not as much understanding of how deeply and completely it impacts everything about an animal's life. And I mean, I know it sounds like I'm like maybe overblowing this a little bit, but as you start to learn about the neurobiology of it, it really does impact everything.
I totally agree. I mean, when I look, like I said, looking into trauma, you're like, oh my gosh, the cortisol and the adrenaline and all those, chemicals that are going through your veins. What would you say is some of the most profound things that you have, like, I know there's a lot, so, it's going to be hard to take, but like if you're thinking about the biggest thing that a listener that was maybe listening right now, who's like, really, stress affects dogs that much? Like, what would be some takeaway things that you could tell listeners about, like some big things that they might not be aware of that their dog's affected by, or animal, really? But we're talking about
Right,
dogs because the book's about dogs, but it could be
right.
any animal, including
Yes.
ourselves. Yeah.
Yes. So I think one of the biggest things is that it changes the brain. It literally changes the brain. And so you see this throughout the lifespan of the animals. So in developing animals, and that means everything from prenatal through adolescence, the brain is still forming and developing. And so animals that are experiencing overwhelming stress during development, it alters their brains in ways that can be very difficult. I don't know if I want to say impossible, but it alters their brain in very long lasting ways, and those impacts continue into adulthood. If you catch it very, very early, you may be able to reverse some of those impacts to a degree. I mean, I'm kind of staying a little superficial because otherwise it would take me 20 minutes or more to answer this question. But
Exactly.
those impacts, so like if mom is stressed during pregnancy and then the puppy is born, that is likely to have impacts on the puppy's behavior as an adult.
Mhm.
And so it changes, and again, I'm keeping this relatively superficial, but there are three primary brain areas that we've identified that stress changes. So one of them is the amygdala, which most people know is the fear center of the brain. It does do more than that. It monitors threat. It's involved in some other emotions and learning and things like that. But basically, what happens is when animals are exposed to overwhelming stress, it
Mhm.
increases their responsiveness to fear. So it makes they're faster to learn to be afraid of things, and it's harder to reverse that fear once it has become established. And then stress damages or decreases function of the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. And the hippocampus, again, we primarily know it for being responsible for memory, but it's involved in other things too, like including cognitive processing. And so when you damage the hippocampus, you're impacting memory in negative ways. And one of the things that the hippocampus is responsible for is context memory. So placing an event in a specific context, a place and time. And so, what researchers think, one of the things that researchers think is happening with PTSD, for example, is that the hippocampus is being damaged and that is preventing the animal from maintaining these context cues. And so, instead of only being afraid of the context where the trauma originally occurred, they may lose the ability to distinguish between safe and unsafe. And now all places become threatening, or maybe all places other than home, right? And so you can imagine that that can be a huge problem.
Mhm.
And then finally, it damages or impairs function of the prefrontal cortex, which is largely responsible for a lot of the thinking part of the brain
Mhm.
and really self-regulation of behavior. So that's things like regulating emotions, managing attention and focus,
Mm.
and impulsive behavior. And
Mhm.
and so so now you have the amygdala, right, is sort of being overpowered and all of this fear going all of the time. And then you're losing function of the hippocampus to help to provide context. And you're also losing the ability of the prefrontal cortex to kind of tamp all of this down and keep it at a reasonable level. And so that alone,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
only
it's
one thing that stress
right.
does.
I know that's only one part. That's not even bringing cortisol into the mix or adrenaline into the mix or all
Right.
those other things. That is something I love that you actually broke that down really nicely because I work with a lot of fearful reactive dogs and sometimes they come into my puppy class and they're already showing these signs. And I'm really encouraging people to, fix that earlier rather than, oh, they're going to
Right.
grow out of it, because
Right.
that doesn't. And I love that you brought up because sometimes people just like do because, oh, it's stress, they'll get over it. But you're talking about not traumatic, but you are talking a little bit about brain damage. I mean, it's
Yeah.
chemical brain damage and it's stress brain damage, and that's what's happening to these animals. So I think that, I mean, we could talk way more. I love all the neurobiology stuff. So we could talk, but I don't know if everyone else gets all into that nerdy stuff. But so if you have this, tell us a little bit about resilience. I know
Yeah.
that, you in your book, you talk about unlocking resilience and enhancing their well-being. So you've got this damage that's starting to happen. How can you build, what would you suggest? And obviously people can read your book and have more if they want the
Right.
details, but like kind of again, surface level about resilience.
Resilience is basically the ability to cope with stress effectively so that it doesn't cause long-term damage, the kind that we're talking about. And so, as you said, in the ideal world, we're building resilience from a very young age, but you can absolutely still build resilience in adults. So it's not like it's hopeless. I mean, it's not even close to hopeless, really, right? So there's kind of two things that you can tackle. You can tackle the stressor itself, and that is things like management, right? Like minimizing how often the dog is exposed to the stressor, how close they get to the stressor, how long it's lasting. And then medication is part of that too, especially when you can't control those other things,
Mhm.
right? So if you live in the upper Midwest or the central Midwest or Florida and your dog is scared of thunderstorms, you can't just say, well, we're just going to avoid thunder, right?
Right. Right.
So that's where things like medication can play a role.
Mhm.
And then the other end of it, which I'm much more excited about, I mean, I'm totally for management and medication,
Right.
but the part that gets me really excited is what we're seeing now is that we can actually do things that can enhance a dog's ability to cope with that stress. So there's kind of five things outside of dealing with the stressors themselves. There's social support. So that's like comforting your animal, uh, is social support and being there for them and not correcting them or trying to punish them when they are frightened. There's exercise. We know from and I do want to clarify that unfortunately we have pretty limited research in dogs on the specific on each of these specific things, but I think in all of them we have some research on dogs and a huge amount of research in other species. And we have enough research in other species, particularly in mammals, to know that the stress response system and what causes stress and what improves stress resilience is really very similar across species, and again, especially mammals. And we have tons of rodent research and primate research and human research. And then there's kind of smatterings of research across a wide variety of other species, including dogs and cats. So we don't have a lot of specific research on dogs and exercise, but we have very convincing research on the benefits of exercise in other animals,
Mm-hmm.
including humans, and that it has these antidepressant effects. And then enrichment, I could talk for hours about
Mm-hmm.
enrichment. I know we don't have
Mm-hmm.
time to do that today. But enrichment, and I'm going to define enrichment because they're changing how they define it in the research world. And I think it's really, really important. So enrichment is activities that the animal is able to or chooses to willingly engage in that improves agency, which I will also define, and well-being. And so in order for enrichment to be valuable and helpful, it has to have those qualities that the animal is engaging with it, that it's improving resilience, and that it's improving well-being or and agency. So agency, and again, the definition of this is changing. Agency means providing animals with an environment where they have the choice and control to engage in and explore their environment, which then allows them to gather information and develop skills that help them cope with later challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So that's different than just providing choice, right? Like choice
Mm-hmm.
could be, you know, do you want this trait or do you want that trait? Choice could also be, and I'm not recommending this, but this is technically choice. Choice could be, do you want to sit or do you want to get a color correction?
Right.
That is technically choice,
Yeah.
um, but it's not agency,
Right.
right? And so I think that is a really important distinction. And then control, again, agency. And then the last one is predictability, which some researchers think, and I agree, that probably the reason predictability matters is because it increases control.
Right. If you have predictability in an environment or you feel safer, there's more control. If you haven't experienced it, there is that lack of control. And I think that, and this is a total tangent that we are not going to go on because we'll be on forever. But I think that actually there's a human component of that, of why choke chains is still used, because it's that idea that there's control of, by using punishment. But I think there's a whole avenue of that. So and because you're talking about mammals, I mean, we're talking about dogs, but this research is across the board,
Right.
across anything. So what would be some tips you might be able to give people? So maybe someone's listening and they're like, okay, I know I have a stressed dog. And now they're kind of panicking because now they're like, oh my God, my dog's brain is broken. And I don't know how to do some of these things. Like, okay, exercise. Okay, my dog likes, doing these things. And when I talk about exercise with my clients, I'm like, if the walk is a trigger the whole time, that's not fun exercise for your dog. Like, then
Right.
maybe, but if they like to play ball in the backyard or, go do something else, then, the exercise has to be fun. And my example is like one of my sons plays water polo and is a swimmer. He can jump in the water at 5 in the morning and it can be freezing. I am a hiker runner, but I would not find exercising in that pool entertaining,
Yes.
or it would be stressful. My walk, my hikes, and my runs reduce my stress. I can leave and come back to decrease stress. If I was to jump in that freezing cold pool, I'd probably be more angry than if
Right.
I was. So,
Yes.
but so I think that, exercise people might understand, but some little tips people might be able to take if they are starting to realize my dog's stressed. How can I incorporate some of these 5 things into my
Right.
dog's life?
So I would say the biggest thing is agency. And
Mhm.
what's interesting is what you're seeing in the literature is that agency and enrichment are sort of starting to combine into the same thing. Because if you'll remember, when I defined enrichment, I said it increases agency.
Yes.
So in some ways, I almost wonder if we're going to end up with 4 categories instead of 5, although that hasn't technically happened yet. And one thing I want to mention too, and actually this also has to do with agency and control, is that The research on exercise is based on voluntary exercise. So if
Mhm.
you force an animal to do something, you're not necessarily going to see the same beneficial results. Just like if you force someone to run a mile, they're probably not going to be loving that.
Right, exactly. Like
Um,
if you forced me to be in the pool, I'm not going to like you anymore. And I'm not, that's
well,
not
that
gonna make
too. Right.
exactly.
Right.
So yeah, I
Yes.
mean, it's so much people think, they have to take their dog on a walk. And I have to tell people there is no law that you have to take your dog on a walk if your dog doesn't like a walk.
Yes.
So
Right.
finding other ways that they like to exercise. So some
Right.
other tips somebody might be able to take. So
Yeah.
voluntary
So
exercise would be great.
right. So I think becoming an expert at reading body language with the understanding that any improvement, like I don't want to feel like you have to become an expert tomorrow, right? But learn body language, watch videos on TV, study your own animals. Because if we want to increase control in our dogs, we have to understand what they're experiencing so that we can advocate for them.
Mhm.
And not only for, you know, helping them avoid things that they don't want to do, but also recognizing what they really enjoy and promoting that. And I do think it's important to be clear just because sometimes this is a criticism I hear of people who don't use punishment and aversives. No one that I have ever heard on the positive reinforcement side of things has ever said that dogs should have no rules and that they should be able to do every single thing that they want. But that's not what we're saying.
Exactly.
Right? Like they still have to be able to function in their family. They have to function in society. They have to be safe. Other people and animals have to be
We can have
safe.
boundaries with them and healthy
Right.
boundaries. Like, my
Yes.
dog's not allowed to just get in my face or eat my food out of my mouth. Like,
Right.
and I'm a
Exactly.
positive force-free trainer, but my dogs
Right.
have boundaries of you can be on the bed right now or you can't be on the bed right now. And
Right.
I'm not beating them to do it. I'm just teaching. So it's not
Right.
force,
Right.
but it does. Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I think that's
so
a
I
great
just
point.
yeah, I want to make sure we get ahead of that so people don't think that's what we're saying. But having said that, if you're having people over and you can read your dog's body language and you can see that they're uncomfortable, then you have the option maybe just like opening the basement door and letting them go in the basement or letting them go outside or whatever it might be. Or if you're out in public, like everybody does not have to have permission to greet your dog. They might
Mm-hmm.
not want that,
Right.
right? So it's giving them the option to opt out of things like that are truly optional. And if you think about it, it's like, I don't want to greet every person I see on the
That's what I
street.
tell people all the
Like,
time. Sometimes I go in public and I live in a town that I know a lot of people because I've grown up here. I have businesses here.
right.
There are times that I mean, it's just that I don't feel like talking to somebody that day or something. So
Right.
I'll put my head down or I don't say hi to every person I pass. When I'm running, maybe I give somebody a pause, but I'm listening to my music. I'm on my run. I don't want to stop.
So body language as a route to increasing choice and agency. And then the other thing that I really have been promoting a lot for a little while now is letting our dogs explore their environment. And this, I think this is so important. We don't have research on it, but I have a fairly strong suspicion that hurrying dogs, especially young dogs, along on walks is actually contributing to this on leash reactivity because they are losing that opportunity to gather information about their environment. And one of the things that does is it increases the number of things in the environment that are novel.
Mhm.
And as animals get older, they start to become more neophobic, so more cautious and suspicious of unfamiliar things. Plus, they're not developing the skills to deal with these unfamiliar things. So, um, one of the examples that I give a lot is like Halloween or Christmas decorations. I mean, I see videos, especially around that time of year, of people like there's one video I was watching this woman who had a husky who was like stopped and growling at this like hooded dark figure,
Yes.
which is honestly a very reasonable thing to do,
Right.
and she was laughing at the dog and dragging it past this figure. And what I would recommend doing in those situations, and I'm just talking about inanimate objects, because once you start introducing living beings and fear, that gets a lot trickier. But
Mhm.
in terms of inanimate objects, if your dog is scared of something and they're stopping to evaluate it, don't force them to evaluate it, but give them the permission to check it out if that's what they choose to do. Because again, now what they're doing is they're gathering information about the environment.
Mhm.
They're learning, what do I do when I face these scary things? Can I cope with this? And then generally they're learning that it's not actually threatening, right? And so then they can kind of put it out of their mind and continue on with their day. And if they do that enough, they don't have to keep doing it their
Right.
entire life.
Right.
And so they
Right.
see these new things and they're like, I don't know, maybe I don't know what that is, but it should be safe. And it's
Yes.
not a big deal anymore. So
Right.
those are some of the things that I would say. And then the last one is sort of very similar to what you were saying, but basically, there's so many different ways we can enrich our animals.
Mhm.
Take some time to look into those options and find something that you think will work for you and your dog, because it
Mhm.
has to work for the people.
Right.
Otherwise, you're not going to do it.
Right.
Right. So
Yes.
if you've been told to do, to go, that you have to go do agility with your dog because your
Mhm.
dog is so energetic and you just
Mhm.
hate agility, or it's too far away, or it's not at the
Right.
right time, do something else.
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to be one thing. There's
Right.
so many things. And it also, by the way, doesn't have to be a formal dog sport. Like,
Right.
um, hiking and swimming and sniff walks and
Yes.
hiding food around the
I
house.
toss treats in my backyard or my patio sometimes. And like my Jack Russell, she's almost 13 now. So
Yeah.
that's, really, and she'll stay out there forever and just sniff for every little crumb. I mean, she's almost like tracking, even though it's all informal, but like that's so enriching for her, a formal thing, or, it could be just doing little tricks with them or things
Right.
that they enjoy, and you have to enjoy it too. And I think that's a piece that is coming around, but I've been talking about it more to people. Like, there doesn't have to be a specific list, like you have to follow this recipe. You have different options, and it has to be something you enjoy too, and available. Like, my dog would have loved dock diving. There is no dock diving around here. So if I had gotten
Yeah.
stuck on he has to do dock diving, like we would have gotten stuck, and not being able to progress. So I like that, idea of both sides need to be involved. It also helps improve your bond when you both enjoy the
Yeah.
activity, and it's not torture for the human to take the dog to the activity. Do you have any sort of tips, if we as we kind of wrap up a little bit, any tips that you would give any of a dog owner, whether they have a puppy or they are getting a rescue, or maybe they have an adult dog that they just kind of ignored this, stress because it wasn't addressed properly, or they didn't know what to do about it. They didn't have somebody. Are there any tips that you could give them to get them kind of started onto this journey of changing their perception of and perspective about stress in with dogs?
I mean, a lot of what we already said
Mhm.
would apply. I'm trying to think of resources. I mean, I hate to just promote my own book, but that certainly is written not just for professionals, but also for
Right.
owners. And there's quite a bit of information on stress out there, but I really think, of the things that I haven't already said, I think
Mhm.
probably the most important thing is just be kind to yourself. Like, it's
Right.
really, there's so much pressure now that to give our animals the best possible lives, which I think is a totally valid goal. And you have to recognize what your limitations are. I mean, I literally sat down at my computer yesterday and wrote down a list of like the things that were preventing me from, basically doing enrichment with my dogs as much as I would like to be. And this is for me, it might not be true for everyone, but one of the primary obstacles is perfectionism. And
Mhm.
I'm like, well, I could do this thing, but I don't have this and this and this, or I can't do it as much as I would like to. And then I'm like, oh, well, that's just too hard to do all
Right.
of these things. And so I had a little conversation with myself last night. And I'm like, well, look, you don't have to do it perfectly. Like,
Right.
it's better than not doing anything.
Exactly.
And so just being kind to ourselves and accepting the fact that, we do have limits on our time and our energy and our various other kinds of resources. And one of the things I put down a lot too is like Finn is my younger, higher needs, more social, engaged dog. So he's the one I kind of focus on the most with enrichment. Not that the other one doesn't enjoy it and doesn't get it, because he also does. But I was like, Finn doesn't care. Like, he doesn't care if you're doing it perfectly. He doesn't care if you're
Mhm.
following all the rules. He doesn't
Right.
care, like, that you decide to do it your own way, or that, whatever. Like, he just wants, and again, this is specific to him, but for Finn, he just wants to spend time with me. Like, we could basically be doing anything
Right.
and he would be thrilled to
Right.
spend time with me.
Yeah.
And so he just it doesn't matter to him. We could be walking, we could be laying on the floor and cuddling, we could be playing, like, it doesn't matter. And they're not going to care how clean your training is. They're not going to care, like, they're going to benefit from some kind of pleasant experience with
Exactly.
their people or with other dogs or whatever it is for that dog.
It is one of the things, it's in my mission statement to have empathy and compassion for pets and their people,
Yeah.
because I think that's a big piece, is having empathy for yourself, and you don't have to do it, perfectly. And my dogs, especially because they're both older now, if I'm too busy, because I work from home, so I'm in and out, in and out. But if I'm gone too much at night, they're like, we haven't gotten our cup filled today, and that could
Right.
just be lay with us while you watch TV. Like, just put your hand on me while we're watching TV. Like, that's all. Like, it's not complicated. And then they're really happy. So I think that's
Yeah.
important for people to, give themselves that permission to not be perfect. Well, I could talk to you all day long. I love this subject. It's a passion of mine, and helping dogs. And I love your book. And so I really wanted
Thank
to
you.
help promote it and get people out there. And we will have all the information about your book, in the when we publish this podcast, so everybody can get it. But if you're watching, here it is. I make sure I get it in the camera right. It's super great. And I kind of use it as a resource too. Like, so if there's something I'm like, oh, is there something I can get an idea out of? So check that out. And you have your website too. So we'll put all
Yes.
of that stuff so people can find out more. And you have webinars and things that you produce about all of these subjects. So if anybody wants
Yes.
to follow her, we'll have all of our information on this podcast information. And just because Kristina and I could talk all day long about this, I'm sure we will cut it short. So if you are on a drive, you don't have to worry about missing anything. So thank you so much, Kristina, for being here today. It's been
Thank
such a
you.
pleasure. I really hope that this helps people understand their stress in their dogs and help reduce their own stress, because that perfectionist piece is a huge piece, I think. So
Right.
thank you
Right.
all for listening. Please check out all of Kristina's resources, because it's great, because if you learn from her, you will be able to help your dog, reduce their stress. So thank you so much. And thank everybody for listening today.
Thank you for having me.